welcome to this recital of works, solo works by Beethoven, Ravel and Granados. I've recently completed a PhD, which is something that I would not recommend that anybody undertakes. I've lost about 5 years of my life doing it. I had to actually give 3 big solo concerts, including a concerto with orchestra. At the worst part, I'd rather have played another 5 concerts, but I had to write this thesis, which for a musician is really something that we are not good at writing. We're good at playing, but we're not really good at writing. But what's really interesting is there's this whole new school of research that's actually coming out overseas, where performers are actually writing about the process that they undergo in preparing a performance. Because it's really an infinitesimal amount of decisions that a performer has to make. He's got the ground, he's got the score as a background, but he has to, if he wants to express his own personality, there's many things that he has to decide in the process of preparation. And this is what I actually did for my thesis. There's a fabulous scholar, British pianist called Julian Hellaby. His book is just called Music Performance, if you can get hold of it. It's really interesting. It goes through the psychology of performance. It really is a book for performers and how they actually are now beginning to write more like academics, which wasn't the case in the past. Academics always used to poo-poo us performers. Oh, well, you're just a performer, that type of thing. That's all changing now. And I chose, the work that I chose to be the centerpiece of my recital was this Beethoven Sonata, Opus 109, for the simple reason that it's a work which is so different from Beethoven's other sonatas that it offers a lot of opportunity for discussion. And I'm going to just go through it very briefly. I know I'm supposed to be playing and not talking too much, but just to give you an idea of how different this work is from all the others that he wrote. By the time Beethoven wrote this piece, he'd written 30 other sonatas, and all of them sort of fitted really quite neatly into a mold, which this one doesn't. He breaks all the molds. When he got into the late time of his era of his life, he was really getting old, and this late period, as we call it, was the beginning of new horizons for Beethoven. He started writing music of a type that he'd never really written before, and I'll just give you a few ideas briefly before I play the piece. The first movement is marked vivace, ma non troppo, which means lively but not too lively. Now, when you see the word vivace, that's already a contradiction. The word vivace is actually usually a much faster piece, but this is what he comes up with. You'll hear it's not vivace. That's it. That's the whole first theme, all right? Now, a sonata usually has an exposition where there's many themes, quite a few themes that are set out and making way for the development which will follow later, but he doesn't do that. You can hear how short it is. And then all of a sudden there's something else, which he marks now adagio espressivo. Some more chords. The first theme was much more flowing, and this is. All right. Now, in the course of my thesis, my opinion is that Beethoven actually drew on a lot of past music traditions. For instance, in the Baroque era, you had toccatas and fantasias. These are more sort of improvisatory style of composition, where. And here it is, the perfect example of it. You'll hear it now. See, he changes it all the time. Here. Right. The first movement is probably the shortest of all Beethoven's first movements, of all his sonatas. And the second one is no less short. It's marked prestissimo, okay? Now, as part of the thesis, part of this Julian Hellaby's ideas is that there's always extraneous influences on music. which influenced the composer in his conception of the music. And Helleby calls these ideas topics, okay, so there can be any extra musical ideas. So this prestissimo movement, I actually decided that because it's really very energetic and very dramatic, that it had a close resemblance to a piece by Schubert. Beethoven and Schubert actually were contemporaries, and they lived in Vienna at the same time, and they had met each other. And the key of this prestissimo second movement is in the same key as the Schubert piece. So that's what the parallel that I drew. And the piece by Schubert is the Earl King, which is a famous song, very dramatic. So I used that in my thesis to describe and to give idea of the character of the second movement. It's restless. It's like in the song you hear this horse is galloping. What happens in the song is that the father is trying to save the child who's dying of fever, and the horse is galloping and trying to get to a doctor in time. And it struck me that this was quite similar to the second movement of the sonata. Now the main movement, also the prestissimo, is also extremely short, only about 2 minutes long, and definitely the main movement is the last movement, which I think has very spiritual, if not religious, overtones. It's a very pious, chordal kind of, it sounds like a hymn, really, the theme that he chooses. It's a theme in variation, so the theme is very slow and, as I said, quite religious in character. He marks in German, at the top of this movement, Gesang voll mit innigster Empfindung, okay, which means to be played in a singing style with the deepest emotion. So that gives you an idea of actually how you have to interpret this. And then it goes through 6 variations, each of a completely different character. Some are more staccato, very short. Then there's a fugue. Etc. Let's listen to the whole work, and then you can decide whether you think it's a great work or not. So, Beethoven Sonata number 30, Opus 109. amazing to think that he wrote that when he was completely deaf. Isn't that incredible? Just amazing. The next half of the recital, there are 3 works, 2 by Ravel and 1 by Granados that I'll finish off the concert. I also played these in my PhD recital. So we jump forward 100 years now, from 1820, almost 100 years. We get to the early part of the 20th century. Maurice Ravel was a famous French Impressionist composer, together with Claude Debussy. Those are the 2 composers that form the French Impressionist school. But the thing with Ravel is that he was always inspired by earlier music, by the music of the 18th century in particular. And he wrote this piece that I'm going to play now called a sonatine, which is really, the English is sonatina. It just means a small little sonata, so it's in 3 tiny little movements. It was written in 1903. There was this magazine that was running a competition for young composers to compose a movement of a sonatina that should not exceed 100 bars in length. And of course, I think Ravel's was a little bit longer than that. And of course, the magazine went bankrupt, so before Ravel had the chance to win the competition. So he then decided he liked the first movement so much, he added a second and third movement, and it was published and actually became very famous. He never actually played the last movement. I think this is actually a bit of a cheek. These composers that write these terribly difficult pieces and then they can't play them themselves. So he always stopped at the end of the second movement anyway. So that's the sonatine. It's a small work in three movements, and then a real showstopper next is the Alborada del Gracioso, which means Morning Song of the Jester. This is a piece that's taken from his piano suite called Miroir, which is mirrors, obviously. It was started off life as a piano suite, but he later orchestrated quite a few of the movements, including the Alborada. But I think most piano fans will find that the piano version is much more exciting. It's got wonderful glissandi and double notes and repeated notes, sort of are lost in the orchestral version. Anyway, the piece is about this jester, which, as you know, is a famous figure throughout European history, really. In the last 500 years, Shakespeare is jesters, or he calls them fools. And this is a Spanish jester, hence the title Alborada, it's Spanish. The character of the music is very Spanish as well. But half the time, I think the Spanish jester is slightly inebriated. You'll hear in the music where he's staggering around. He's got a lot of wonderful different emotions. He's also very sensitive. You can hear in the middle section of the Alborada, you'll hear the morning song where he's actually pining, obviously, for some lovely damsel. But of course, that doesn't last long, and then he carries on with his rambunctious behavior. And then the last piece is the Allegro de concierto, staying in Spain, although Ravel, of course, was French. This is now a real Spanish composer, Enrique Granados. This piece was written in 1903, the Allegro de concierto. It means concert allegro. It was a test piece that the Madrid Conservatoire actually commissioned him to compose, to test young aspiring pianists that wanted to come and study there. And of course, the piece is filled with any kind of technical challenge that he could have fitted into 10 minutes. Interestingly, Granados is the only great composer to have died a violent death, really. He, in 1916, he was returning from a trip to the United States. He had become extremely famous, and President Woodrow Wilson had invited him across to the States to play in the White House, and etc. And it was in the middle of the First World War, and on his return home to Spain, their ship was hit by a U-boat in the Atlantic, and Granados, seeing his wife struggling in the water, jumped in, and unfortunately they were both drowned. So anyway, the music lives on. So first sonatine, then Alborada, and then Allegro. pardon, I've got a memory lapse. Let's start that again. I've already had one concert today, so excuse that.